they have to leave the bodies inside the streets. Because there's just so many people dying from it. Kind of get frustrated sometimes because you have a look at the devastation that's caused by COVID. Times that by about 1,000, and that's where malaria is. And if we get the same response to malaria, the difference that it would make, if we could just grab everybody's attention that they've got with COVID and transfer that once COVID was done and dusted to malaria, the difference would be huge. Okay, so here, I've just kind of drawn a map of where malaria is most prevalent. And you remember that map, okay, because there's an important part of this map. So have a look at where it all is. And they're the countries that are affected the most by malaria, the dark red being the most affected. It actually used to be infection places in the United States and in Australia, but we managed to get rid of it. Okay, so then that comes onto this where I've been into it. Okay, what could I do about it? Who was I? I was a nothing, as a teenager. And then when we moved back to Australia, I worked in the cattle industry, and also was a pilot. I got my pilot's license up in the beginning, but I always wanted to do something about malaria, but knowing about cattle, and I worked in a certain section of the cattle industry that most people don't like to talk about. Usually ends up on your plate. That's where I worked. But and I worked as a pilot. I ferried aircraft. And so for a long time, I always wanted to do something, and this is it's moved. But for a long time, I wanted to do something about it. I had no idea. Then one day, I was at a flying club meeting, and these two girls got up and talked about how they're raising awareness about breast cancer by competing in this air race called the Powder Puff Derby. And so I was sitting beside a friend of mine, and I said to myself, we could do something like that with aircraft and raise awareness about malaria. And I said to him, what we should do is fly to Papua New Guinea and back and raise awareness about malaria. And then he said a couple of words that changed his life and my life. He said to me, he goes, well, if you're being serious, you'll fly around the world because it's a global problem. And I remember we're sitting in the club together, and I got thinking about it. I can't tell you anything more about that meeting that night. And that's the guy that said it. I don't know whether he regrets saying that or not. And so I thought about it. I went home and I was like, you know what? I think I'll do that. I'll fly around the world. And no, I just decided that's what I was going to do. And I told a few people about it, and they thought I was utterly insane because there's a lot of blue stuff between the green stuff. And so I got talking to him, and I said, let's do this. Let's make this happen. And let me tell you, if you ever want to fly a plane around the world, talk about an exercise of logistics, it is something to behold. Try and get this. So we finally managed to found out in our research that no Australian-made aircraft has ever flown around the world in history. And so that's when we knew we had a cap to hang this whole venture on. And so we got sponsored. We raised sponsorship of $250,000. We did that in 12 months. And we found a sponsor called Mahindra. Probably heard of it, the Mahindra tractor. Well, they bought into aviation. They decided to be the sponsor of the major sponsor. And that aircraft back there is the aircraft we literally flew around the world. And I wish I could explain how hard it is to organize. Every single country requires a permit. You have to literally fly to a specific point in the middle of the ocean to legally move into the next country's airspace. There's this other thing called gravity. Okay? And gravity, it can really get you down sometimes.
Oh my God.
But the thing that keeps you up is this wonderful thing called the American word gas. Okay, we call it petrol. But our gas will keep you in the air. And when you're flying an airplane over the water, there's no refueling points on the water. So we had to work out a way to basically lighten the aircraft up as much as possible so that we could put enough fuel on board to cross all the oceans. And so we lightened that thing, took everything out of, including this wonderful thing. If you're a pilot, you'll know how important this piece is. We took it off, called the autopilot. So we had to get rid of that because it was one of the heavier bits of equipment in there, which means we had to hand fly this aeroplane over water at night. So, because the legs were 12, 14, one leg was 20 hours and 14 minutes long. So fly through the night, through the next day, and then you land and get some sleep, and you get to do it again and again and again and again, 62 days. So it turned out to be something that we planned it all. We were all excited. We had to organise, we had to freight fuel into the middle of the Pacific Ocean out to an island and tell them, here's some drums of fuel. Had to work out how many drums of fuel we're going to use 6 months before you actually got there without seeing the weather. So that's the type of stuff we had to do. We got it all done, and then we had all these ideas about how we're going to be ready for it and plan and practice, and then life happened. And so my first takeoff at night happened on the flight. I shouldn't say takeoff at night. First takeoff night in this machine. I had some night flying, don't worry. Was in this machine, overloaded. So we had this airplane 30% overloaded. If you fly, hello? The plane does not like, again, the gravity thing really starts to take effect the heavier you get. And so it was a huge learning curve. If you can imagine being blindfolded in a bottle of ink and then moving at 150 miles an hour, that's what it's like flying at night. And there's these things called storms. You can't see them at night. So you'll be flying along by hand, you're staring at 4 instruments, like your eyes are just fixated on them, and then you'll hit a storm, and then you're all over the place, and all you're trying to do is stay alive. That's number one thing. And number two thing, you actually have to make sure that you keep the heading going straight, because what happens where a lot of people get killed is you start circling inside the storm. And you just stay there and stay there and stay there until gravity affects you. So that's the flight route. Now remember the map with malaria. Okay, so that's the route we took. The world is actually a lot bigger than that picture. That's not to scale. So if you remember the malaria map, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to trace where the issue with malaria was with the flight. Okay, so we actually tracked, it's one of the longest circumnavigations of the Earth in aviation history. I think we're number 3 ever in history. So what we did is we visited malaria-affected areas along the way to highlight how bad the issue was and how bad the problem was. And that's it. Well, that was the first day, one of the first days we started. That's us heading along. I'm going to kind of scoot along here, okay? If you have questions, stick your hand up. It's a lot easier to put your foot up. Okay. This is the Kiribati. One of my first time, we're getting along, and this island's out in the middle of nowhere. And when you're flying all day and that fuel gauge is getting lower and lower and lower, and you've not seen any land, it's amazing how the pulse rate starts to increase, and you're looking and you're looking and you're looking. And the water here was just incredible, but it's just one of those things. We did it for 2 months, and I never, ever got used to flying over that much water. I do it professionally now in jets, and I still have no idea why I did this. But this is one of the things, and this is kind of one of the areas I want to stop for 2 seconds about. You know what, with the way things are right now, things can be very bleak, things can be very difficult, things can be very hard. And you feel like there's just no end in sight. When you're flying at night, by hand, all night, that plane, when you first took off, you're 30% overloaded. The plane's trying to roll over on its back. Okay, so you're fighting it, like for 6 hours, it's trying to roll over on its back. So you have this foot just buried to the floor as hard as you can push it, and then you're fighting this thing, you're going through storms, and you're just hanging on for dear life. And then you've got this thing called the stall siren. The stall siren means that the plane's about to drop. It's no longer going to fly, and you have to balance it. So you're never supposed to hear it, but you hear it for the first hour when you're flying fully overloaded. So it's going beep, 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 beep. The main thing is don't get it to be constant. So it's going beep, you're dead. So you just got to balance it. So you're sitting all on that for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours, and you're fighting it, and you can't stop because again, the whole gravity thing. So, and then it just seems like when your arms are so tired, your legs so sore, then you see a little bit of grey, and then you see that. And that is one of the most amazing sights you've ever seen. Never got tired of seeing that. People say to me, what was it like flying around the world? That's generally what you saw. People are like, oh, the views and the sights must have been amazing. Oh, yeah, I suppose. We worked it out one day that 80% of the flight was what we call it. Any pilots in the room? Any pilots in the room? Okay, it's called instrument flight rules, which means you can't see the ground. Okay, so we worked about 80% of the flight was full IFR, you couldn't see the ground. So there's another situation. If you remember, in 2010, the United States decided to extradite a drug lord out of Jamaica. and they had a big, huge state of emergency. Well, we somehow managed to land in the middle of it. So we took off out of Louisiana. Sorry, I'm learning American. Louisiana. Anyway, that place down there where they don't speak English. And apparently the expedition started after we left. And so the leg was 13 hours long. So we got there, and as you can see, the runway lights are not on. So we're on, no lights. We keep, ask the tower, can turn the lights on, no response from anyone. This is Kingston, Jamaica. And nothing. So we landed, and then the guys came running out to us with guns and everything. Well, what do you know what you're doing here? And we said, well, there's land, there's a lot of water, this is where we decided to stop, but we can't be here. And we kind of took care of that. We're here. So, those of you who don't know me, I have a terrible sense of humor, and pretty much everything is funny. So it saved me a lot of trouble. Yes, this is one of those things you just got to deal, again, bring it back to reality here. You have to deal with the cards you're dealt. Sometimes some people try and escape, and run away from their problems. You have to deal with them. And the best way to deal with them is just head on. Just grab them. This is what's happened. This is what's going on. The old phrase, suck it up, buttercup, here we go. You just got to deal with it. Okay, this is another thing you have to fly through. That there, I did fly through. Gravity is a fascinating thing, especially in a storm. So I managed to find out that plane can drop 9,000 feet at a time. So when you're light, because that is light compared to a lot of the big stuff most of you have been on. Yeah, so we're flying, and we had this thing called a lightning finder. It was the lightest thing we could get to help us out find storms, and all it did was just measure static discharge. And so we flicked this thing on because there's a little bit of cloud, and there was 1 or 2 X's, which meant there were lightning strikes, and the screen refreshes every 3 minutes. So the screen refreshed, and there was about 40 of them. That's not good, little green X's. So we kind of maneuvered to try and get around it. The screen refreshed, and the whole screen went green, which meant we were in the middle of a superstorm. And so we were for a little while at 9,000 feet, and then magically we were at 2,000 feet, and then magically we were at 14,000 feet, and magically, and this was just unbelievable. It was so bad that the screening on the vents, on the air vents in the cockpit, all broke, and the water from the storm was going in there. So they had like 4 fire hoses inside the cockpit while you're trying to keep the thing. It was fascinating. But the good thing was, the guy I was flying with, he had, when God was creating him, he took out the fear factor out of his brain. And so I'm flying this thing, and it was savage. It was like nothing I've ever been on. And next thing, I'm pouring, this rain's going everywhere, it's pouring wet, this everything that was on the floor is on the roof, and it's back down again, and the plane's dropping sideways. At one point, actually, it fell backwards, and he starts to laugh. He goes, check this out. I'm kind of busy. No, you gotta look at this, you gotta look at this. And he had the power pulled, because what we do, if you're a pilot, if it's really bad, you split the duties up. So one person flies, the other person controls the engine. So he was controlling the engine. And he goes, I've got the power all the way back to idle, and we're going up at 5,500 feet a minute. He goes, do you realize if we can get this fuel consumption, we can actually save about $14,000 on fuel costs? And I looked over there, and he had a pencil and paper out in the middle of all this, and he's actually there working it out. And I knew at that moment I picked the best guy to come with me on that flight. So that's another thing. That's the plane that, again, in a place that most people. I still can't believe we were there. It's one of my highlights of the flight. That's on Ascension Island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And I'm going to kind of take us to a side step here. The people in the far your right, my left, if that's the usual way we do things, that's the British Army. And in moments like these, when things are tough, find people that will come alongside you. It's critical. And that's one of the things I see people do. They hit some hard times in their lives, and they go inside their shell and they don't talk to anyone. They don't seek help. And we got to Brazil, and there was these massive storms covering up the northern coast of Africa, which is where we're going to go through. And couldn't get in. And again, I've got quite a few friends here, and I don't like to ask for help ever. And I realised that there's no way in the world going to get across the Atlantic without some help. So I called the British ambassador. Google's a wonderful thing. I found his phone number in Google. And so I texted him and said, hey, I'm this guy with a plane and I need to get across the Atlantic Ocean. Can I land on your military base and get some fuel? And he replied and told me no. And so I emailed back and said, you need to say yes. Explain the whole thing to him and back and forth, back and forth. So we were the first single-engine aircraft in history to be allowed to land there. And so we landed there, and the British Army turned it on for us. Like it was phenomenal. They hadn't seen a single engine on the island ever. So we landed. They took great care of us. And the most amazing thing is one of the issues we struggled with on the flight was getting good meteorology reports, because as you can imagine, trying to get meteorology reports out of the middle of nowhere at a moment's notice. At any time, even in the US at times, I mean, you have a look at weather forecasts, how those guys get paid for what they do is beyond me, because, geez, they're wrong a lot. But anyhow, the British Army said to us, we'd like to come on board as a sponsor of your flight, and we'd like to do the weather for you for the rest of your flight. And so the British Army literally did the weather for us for the rest of the flight. And normally a weather report's about a page long. Our average weather report from the British Army was 42 pages long. It was incredible. I mean, they could even give you the driver's license number of the 747 that was going to be flying through the storm before we got there. It was incredible. But it was just a huge blessing and a massive help to us as we proceeded through Asia. I honestly think some of their work saved their lives, because some of the stuff they could give us was just beyond critical to what we needed. We made some really important decisions on the flight because of it. Again, that was another amazing sight. You can see the cloud in there. If you're flying through a cloud at night, you know how I told you being blindfolded and black, blindfolded in a bottle of ink going 100 miles an hour. Put a whole stack of bombs into it all night. Imagine trying to juggle blindfolded in a bottle of ink. That's what it was like. And that was a big day. That there is the coast of Africa. And flying across the top of that, it was the first time we got it. I know it's a bad picture, but we crossed the Atlantic Ocean. That was a big thing. So we took that and we were like, wow. The Pacific Ocean was great. It took us 7 days. It wasn't too bad. The Atlantic was hard work, because storms are everywhere, so you're dodging storms non-stop. So this guy here, phenomenal guy. His name is Coffee. Coffee's one of my, as Joe knows, I love coffee. But his name was Coffee, so I thought that was a sign, And he really took care of us in Africa. Like that guy, he just went above and beyond everything we could ever imagine. Took care of all our permits, just emails all the way through, make sure we had everything we needed. Incredible guy. I wanted to include him in this because I just can't talk high enough. He did all this stuff for us months before we even arrived. He would email me how things going with your flight. Terrific guy. And again, getting those people beside you, talk to them, communicate. And it's amazing the people that will come alongside you. This is have any of you heard of Watoto? Watoto Orphanage? Okay, so Watoto based in Uganda, and they basically take, I'm sorry, I can't do this without tears up. So these are babies that get thrown into bins and toilets, and they take the babies out of the toilets and out of the dumps and everything, and they look after them. And so this village here, what they did there is you heard of the ISIS and some of the horrific things they did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, ISIS are also in Africa. And this village here was, the mothers there were attacked by the Khmer Rouge, which is an ISIS branch in Africa. And I won't go into details, but what they visited on those women was beyond horrific, including cutting their lips off. And so what they did is they employed those mothers to be the mothers for the children that had been thrown into the dumps. Unbelievable. And so we ended up putting a lot of time and money into mosquito nets and malaria medication for these orphanages. And it was just incredible seeing women who had gone through so much and yet being used in such a huge way in the lives of these children. And it was just to this day, I mean, at this point in the flight, I was beyond exhausted. We had flown ridiculous hours. You know, every day you think you're going to die. I mean, literally, not, you know, hypothetically, you literally think you're going to die. Because you're flying through, you're hitting these storms. Some of the storms are massive. You know, your plane's out of control for sometimes over a minute. You're trying to get the plane back under control again. But I got to hear and I knew what I was doing was the right thing to do. And so I'm still in contact with these people. They've got 3 villages in Uganda alone. There's 2 million orphans. And there's a TV show in the morning, and all they do for 2 hours is bring orphans in front of the TV camera saying, do you know this person? Do you know this person? Do you know this person? And if you know them, can you come and get them? We've got 2 million orphans. And this is a country that's devastated by malaria, absolutely devastated by it. And so for me, it was a turning point in the flight because I was ready to quit. I was done with it. Like, you know, it was just such hard work, mentally, emotionally, physically. But getting here really turned into something worthwhile. And then here is the coast of India, with across the Indian Ocean. So it was another big thing. There's the Hawaiian version of what they do to you in India. So Indian version of what they do to you in Hawaii. So again, it was a good feeling getting across to India. This is our major sponsor, and they turned it on for us. So this guy here, right here, that is the Mr. Mahindra. Like that's where the name comes from. Multi-billionaire. And it goes to show, like, again, the flight could not have happened without that guy. And here's a guy with all the money in the world. He took, like, personal interest in the flight. And, you know, I would have brought it in, but he gave us, like, an award for it all. And when he gave his speech, you know, he put his notes down and just spoke from the heart. And it was good to see someone that wealthy. At the time, he was worth $4.4 billion. Have an absolute genuine concern about malaria and what it was doing. And having him come on board, and even now we talk to each other on LinkedIn, but unbelievable guy. And it's surprising the people that you'll meet along the way if you just open up and say, hey, are you aware about this? Because people out there's a lot more caring people out there than I think we realize. And we just need to talk and be open. But again, a huge debt of gratitude to this guy here. This one here, this is the epitome of patience. Yeah. So that tank in here, that's the fuel tank that we use to fill up the whole back of the plane. Yeah. There's 1,000 litres in there. But so that's 1,000 litres. That red container is 20 litres. Okay. And it comes out of a 44-gallon drum. I do know that. So refueling normally takes about 25 minutes. 3.5 hours later, they fuel that thing. And I was like, I wanted them to hurry up so bad. I was so tired. I was flying 16 hours. We had to be at the next place the following day, so I had another 14-hour day ahead of me. And we got 3 hours sleep that night. But those guys were so nice. But the reason I say all this, they didn't know any English except one thing. They knew all the words to the Nat King Cole song, Mona Lisa. I have no idea why they knew those words. I used to like that song. So that's all they did. And so when they're putting the fuel on, they're like, Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa, and I kind of stupidly said, you also like the lady with the mystic smile. And that was it, we had a connection. And so for 3.5 hours, they filled their aeroplane and sang that song. And like it was. Okay, this is in Papua New Guinea. This is where I grew up. Right now, you can see there's the wing there. We're at 10,000 feet. And you can see the mountains. And sometimes life's like this picture. You're as high as you can go. You're working as hard as you possibly can, but it seems like everything's above you. And you can't beat it. And, you know, to me, this is the most amazing country on the planet. And sometimes you can be in the most amazing place in your life and you feel like you can't take another step forward. And that's what this place is like. And it was the hardest flying. Flying up there was ridiculously hard. When I learned to fly there, the year I learned to fly, 55 pilots died flying up in there. And I took this picture because there's another lesson here, I think, for us all. This picture here is Tim Price, okay, the guy I flew around the world with. We've been flying by this stage for 50 days. And what he's doing here, he felt like he needed some practice. I thought he needed some help. He said to me, he says, I just want to practice. We're going to be going into some really tight areas here. I'm going to practice. Yeah, and so many times we go and I know I'm speaking to myself here. We go and do something. We're going to go and talk to our friends. We're going to sort something out without any practice. We're just going to shoot off the hip, and see. And how many times have you made a comment on Facebook or you said something and you just shot off the hip? Never thought about it. Never sat down and go, okay, what do I need to do? How can I do this the best way possible? He did this for an hour. Literally ran it around. The guy is the genius of a pilot. He felt like he needed to make sure he could do it right. If I could put that in my own life, and before I go and say something to someone or criticize someone or crack at someone, I'm the safety officer at the job that I work at. And so I have to talk to pilots about mistakes that they make. As you know, pilots are very humble, quiet creatures. It's a fun job. And I try and do what he does. So now before I go and say, what on earth did you do that for? Let's just back off a little bit. Think about it for a moment. Get it right up here. Get my head in the right space. And then bring in those quiet, humble creatures and talk to them. This guy here's another one. I speak a couple of languages, but it'd been a while since I spoke the main language in Papua New Guinea. So I contacted this chap and said, hey, listen, would you be interested in joining us and being a translator? I'm not too sure I'm still fluent like I used to be. And it turned out we didn't need him, and I think he was really wishing that we didn't. Because unbeknownst to me, I didn't know this until about 3 days into it, this guy is petrified of flying. Never said a word, kept his mouth shut, and we were flying into remote jungle locations to get information about malaria, including one place where we actually literally took the wheels through the tops of the trees to get into the runway, like bang, 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 into there. And now Tim and I, we grew up flying there, so we were used to it. This poor guy wasn't. And we didn't know until we got almost to the end of the trip, and we found him behind the men's bathroom on the phone to his wife, bawling his eyes out. And he was like, these guys are insane. These guys. He told his wife that we were demon possessed. He said, you wouldn't believe what they're doing to us in this plane. Anyway, so we found out, we kind of apologized to him, like, we would have done the same thing. So. But anyhow, we found out that he was the pastor of the church. And so we thought on the Sunday, because both Tim and I are Christians, we'd go to his church. So we got there just a wee bit late, and he was preaching, and we walked in, and he just stopped. As soon as we walked in, he goes, these two people right here. And then he basically committed to insane asylum in front of the entire church. But you know what he did though? He persisted. Because we offered to put him on our home. And he goes, no, I started, I'll finish. What a good example for us. Like, this guy, and he was petrified. But he stuck at it. And I think every one of us in this room have been in situations where it's tough, it's hard. I've got 3 teenage boys, and there are times you're just like, whoa, man, it's how can it get any harder? The most important thing is you keep going. How many of you have ridden horses? Gala, motorbikes, same thing. What's the word? I learned in American motorcycles. If you fall off, the worst thing you can do is stay off, right? You get back on and keep going, and that's life. Like you have to, when you get hit hard, when everything is going bad, when you lose everything you've ever had, you get up, you keep going. You get up, you keep going. You don't fall prey to fear, because if you fall prey to it, fear is a hungry beast, and it'll just keep eating. Okay. So this is in a village called Malamunda. Okay, Malamunda is one of the most remote villages in Papua New Guinea. Here, in this village, and you can't see it, but it was pretty hard to take a photograph of it, but they've lost every single child between 6 and 14 to malaria. There's a whole section. One lady had lost 5 children to malaria. And when I spoke to the Papua New Guinean government, they said they really couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have an elected official. And so the graveyard for this village is larger than the village, literally. So they had lost 2,000 people to malaria in the space of 3 years. 2,000 people to malaria. There's 800 left. And I'm not going to get political here, but I will say this. If you think America is a bad place to live, you need to go and see places like this. When America is an amazing country. Like, you're not going to get any better. And these people here would give anything to be where you are. Anything. To lose 2,000 children and no one cared. No one. And we finally actually got malaria nets into there 5 years ago now. But I had to go to Papua New Guinea myself and fight tooth and nail to get malaria nets to this village. You know, and everybody kept saying, "Why do you care? Why do you care?" Like, no one knows who people from Malamunda are until right now. You've never even heard of Malamunda. But here, you know, we complain because our coffee's not so hot. You know, in Australia, I'm talking about Australia as I'm not pointing the finger at America, but I just get so frustrated when people talk about how terrible America is, how terrible this is in their country. I'm like, oh, get out and have a look. You know, you're not going to get any better. And here in this place here, the happiest people you meet are those people right there. They're the happiest people you meet. You know, of all the places we went to around the world, the biggest smiles, the most fun we had were those ones. The ones that should be like most of us are. Bitter, angry, twisted, you know, I'm not talking to you guys. I'm talking about the average white Australian, average white American. You know, we just get so ripped up about things. And these people, they're just happy to be alive. You know, it reminded me of the saying, you hear the saying, you only live once. It's absolute rubbish. You only die once, you live every day. And that's what these people are. Yeah, I've got to include this guy's photograph because he became our like image. He's got the Millions Against Malaria hat. Papua New Guinea is a funny one. I grew up there, so I know their language. But I told him in Papua New Guinea the word for like what's the word? Hulk type of thing. Yeah. I know the American words for it, but it's hapman. And I was like, "What's the money you kid up hapman?" Which means, you know, look like you're really strong. So that's the pose you get. So I told him I'd make him famous, so I include him in every single presentation I ever do. So this is home. This is home. So 60 days of flying, and then I saw that. That's the coast of Australia. And I tell you, if you've flown around the world, you get really, really excited about seeing stuff like that. That's another thing. Do you ever feel like life has become blind? That's what it looks like when you're flying in the cloud. Okay. You get another image of the cloud. As you can see, the view is incredible. But I think this is generally life for us. You can't see one little bit in front of you. You look out there, there's no one there. You're all by yourself. Okay. And you look at that, and you just think things are completely hopeless. And when you're hand flying, this is not fun stuff. Okay? There's a wonderful thing called a horizon that tells you where you're. You can't see any of that. You have to, and you know, you're looking at these instruments, and that's all you've got is just those instruments. And I know I'm not treading on any toes here, but I'm a Christian, so I'm just going to say it like it is. That's what the Bible's like. Just focus. Focus on what Christ says to us. Focus on that. That's your horizon. And you know, sometimes you get into that stuff and you just think, oh my goodness. And I flew in a storm 2 weeks ago, and it was a oh my goodness moment. I managed to put a 240-pound person in the roof of the plane. It was an interesting effort. And broke the glass, bruised the side of the head, and then I pointed out that when we put the, please put your seatbelt on sign, that's generally what we want you to do. But how many times have we done that? You know, people come and say, hey, I don't think you should be doing that. I think you should be doing that. Oh no, I've got this. I can live my life the way I want to. And we're flying in this type of stuff, but we think we know everything, and then things happen. And so I'd just like to encourage you, like when you feel like this is going on, here's the other side of that. Above this, 200 feet above this, was the sun and the clearest blue sky I've ever seen. Okay. Below us was Brisbane, Queensland. Okay. 1 million people. Was I by myself? Not in the remotest. If I descended to that, I'd go to have dinner in 15 different places. It felt like I was alone, but I wasn't. Okay, and that's where it all started. So that's Bendigo. And that was one of the best sights I ever saw. So when you leave it and you go all the way around the world, I said it was the longest, if you do, we call it pattern work, when you go up and do a circuit, come back and land again, it's the longest pattern ever. So I went all the way around the world to come back to there. And that's us landed. I didn't take that photo, someone else did, because I was actually in the front. Just want to clarify that. And this is us, that's Tim and that's myself. And after we had officially flown around the world, we became the first Australian-made plane to ever fly around the world, and then the third and fourth Australians to ever fly around the world. And this is what I thought, I'd turn it on to about you now, okay? So what is your world to conquer? You know, a lot of people say it must have been amazing to fly around the world. Yeah, it was. I mean, for me, it was like you get up every day and it's just another flight. You know, I did the same distance in a corporate jet last month. But what's your world? You know, it's a bit like when people say, "Oh, you shouldn't make fun of that because there's people starving in Africa." Yeah, I get that, but on the flip side of the coin, we each have worlds in our own lives, in our own hearts that we have to conquer, and they're hard. They're hard. You know, for most of us, they're probably unspoken. But we do have to conquer them. You know, you leave them there and left unconquered. It's a horrible way to live. And what's in your way to conquer the world? For me, there's a lot of oceans. Okay, flying over the land is generally pretty easy, provided you can find places to refuel. Flying over wood is a whole different kettle of fish. It's kind of a pun there. Very large kettle. But what's in your way? And so what you think, when you think about it, is I encourage you to do this. Make a list. What are the things that are stopping you from achieving your dreams right now? What are they? Oftentimes you'll find it in the reflection in the mirror. Now, that's the biggest thing you're going to get in your way. When I decided to do it, I started making a list. And what I did is that line you saw around the world, I drew that line, just one little bit at a time, one little bit at a time. What am I going to get done here? What am I going to get done here? Just don't look at the end and go, oh my goodness, look at all the stuff I'm going to get done. One bit at a time. Work at what you need to conquer that. Work at what you need to conquer that. What has to be done to take the first step? So here's the most important thing, you've got to take that first step. You've got to take that first step. You can look at it till the cows come home, but you've got to take that first step. And then find people to do it with you. Okay, you've got to. You see all the time tragic things, decisions people make. And if they just had a go to someone and say, hey, listen, can you help me out here? I've got this problem. And you know, they might say, no, I really can't, but I do know. But so many of us try and bear this by ourselves, and it doesn't work. I mean, Mr. Mahindra, of all people, decided to come and join my group. You know, 4.4 billionaire, but I had to talk. And sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, the first person to talk to is right there. Talk to him, and he'll bring those right people along the way. Okay, last question is, why haven't you started? So many times it's because, again, the reflection in the mirror. You're too scared to start, or I'm too old. My best flight instructor I ever had, started when he was 65. When he was 65, he started to learn how to fly. He was the guy that taught me how to fly. Unbelievable flight instructor. He decided I wanted him, and he kept having every reason in the world to say he shouldn't fly, and then one day started, stuff it, I'm going to do it. And he became an incredible instructor. But think about it. Why haven't you started achieving your dreams? What's got in your way? What stopped you from conquering your world? Your world might be simply stopping smoking. I need to stop smoking. I can't stop. Go through it. What's in your way? What do you need to do to get started? Who's going to help you along the way? Why haven't you started? I'm going to finish up with two pictures, okay? There's this picture here, and that may be how you feel. A lot of the times that's how I feel. So that's your choice. That's how you can be living your life, okay? But you had it on the back of the shirt. I told you this was here. Okay. But there's this verse here. If I take the wings of the morning and go on the uttermost parts of the sea, I've done that. I've been in the uttermost parts of the sea, and I've taken the wings of the morning. Even there shall your hand lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. So your picture can be more like this. Okay? And that's what he wants to do for us. And that's my presentation. So